Students around the world are finishing their qualifications so they can get ahead in life and make their contribution. If you are studying, researching, or thinking about it, you will need practical tips, techniques, coaching, and support to help you get finished and be successful. I'm Peter Alkemer, the Student Success Coach, and welcome to the podcast. Each episode, I interview successful students and leaders in education so that you will learn everything you need right here. You will learn about writing, completing your thesis and other projects, planning, discipline, how to get more done, supervisors, getting published, getting finished, how to have the right discipline, and many other aspects of student life. Whether you're listening on Spotify, iTunes, Google, or any other podcast platform, please leave a rating and a review. Or if you're watching on YouTube, hit the like button, subscribe, and leave a comment. Either way, please get in touch and let us know what you think of the show and what you want to hear more of. Please always check the show notes for links to courses, material, and plenty more so that you can use what you've learned in each episode, take action, and achieve your student success. Please also join the Student Success Coach community in our exclusive members-only Facebook group where I post regularly and you can interact with fellow students just like yourself. Remember, you can't do this alone, so reach out, get involved, and take advantage. It's my commitment to your success. Now for this week's episode. Kanina, welcome to the show. Thanks very much for joining us. Really a pleasure to have you join us here at the Student Success Coach podcast. And our paths have crossed previously, and I've always benefited from your insights and experience. So our listeners today are really keen to get practical tips and tricks about how they can be successful in their studies. Success might look different to different people, etc. So we, try and cater for that whole range of expectations. But before we get into those and sort of unpack those useful insights and draw on your experience for their benefit, maybe you can just give us some background as to what your journey is academically, your studies, and what's been your student success.
Thank you so much, Peter, and it's a pleasure to be chatting to you too again. My personal story has been an unconventional career path. It's been a zigzagging career path as opposed to a vertical climb, which my mom is a career psychologist, and she reassures me that this is very normal for careers in the 21st century. And I think that's true. It's much, much easier to move laterally nowadays, and in fact important to do so, because the skill set demanded by society is changing so rapidly, and it's so important to keep upskilling yourself, whether you are still an undergraduate or postgraduate or have left university already and have entered work world. So I started my studies in computer science and I graduated with a BSc. I worked for a time as a software engineer, and then I decided that corporate wasn't for me, and then in fact I wanted to be a writer, and that I would go back to school and study a postgraduate diploma in journalism. And then worked as a journalist for about 4 years. And I refer to this time as my second education, where I learned a lot about the country I grew up in that I didn't know before. So spent every day going into office, not knowing where I'd land up that day, whether it would be in court, at a crime scene, speaking to any number of people who'd had any number of experiences, celebrities, entertainment, politics. During that time, I decided that I wanted to pursue my interest in climate change, which was something I'd spent a fair amount of time reporting on. And I went back to school a third time to study a Masters of Science in Global Change.
Wow.
And that taught me a lot about the science of climate change, but it also taught me a lot about the importance of everything that goes around the science, which is what we tend to be missing in our attempts to combat climate change. Yes, we know the science, whether you accept it or not, we know the science, but how do we bring about behavioral change in society? And that is an interdisciplinary pursuit. So it requires not just the scientists, but it requires the anthropologists and the sociologists and the psychologists and the economists. And so I did my research on how to enable interdisciplinarity in a university context. Universities tend to operate in silos, so it's become considered good practice to build out our sphere of knowledge in one pixel at a time in a particular niche area of knowledge. And really where innovation happens is in an interdisciplinary space. We can look at a problem from multiple perspectives and design a holistic solution. So I did my research on how do you break down those silos in universities and start bringing together the computer scientists with the economists, with the sociologists, to design those holistic solutions which can enter society and really make a change to our world.
That is so interesting. And I found in my own PhD that I got a huge amount of insights and more creative thinking when I combined, and I was doing it primarily in engineering, but I brought the social sciences in to try and understand the human aspects of software engineering, and used, theory like methodology like grounded theory, which has its roots in the social sciences, and sort of imported that as a methodology into engineering. And it was just quite interesting to see how I wasn't the first to do that, but was kind of, one of the earlier ones, and there was a growing approach to doing that. And it is being acknowledged as, I think, very important to drive that interdisciplinary research to get those new insights.
Well, that's so important, Peter, because you can engineer the best solution, but if no one wants to use it, then what's the point? So you do, and I agree with you, it's a growing field to study those computer-human interfaces. What do we as humans like to use? What do we identify with? What brings us joy in terms of a solution, which of course affects stickiness, how readily we continue to adopt a solution.
Exactly. And I think, software engineering was always conceived as primarily a human endeavor, but over time and through, waterfall methods and, sort of heavy, intensive upfront planning approaches, I think that human element was taken out of it, and the coder behind the code was dehumanized. And, if we bring back that creative process through methods like Agile and the right environments in large organizations, which also, tend to have very risk-averse policies and procedures that tend to dehumanize, their employees, etc. Perhaps there's a well of creativity that we could draw on to bring, as you say, the right amount of innovative thinking into our software design and development, which I think a lot of successful companies have achieved, and they've tapped into, those unmet needs. And that's what Steve Jobs of Apple and the exponential platforms have, I think, been very successful in doing. So absolutely. And I mean, yeah, we could certainly talk for ages and compare our research in interdisciplinary, the interdisciplinary dynamics in sort of combining two fields. But Kanina, I'm just keen to understand now, as you've had a wonderful, track record as a student, and obviously been in the workplace as well in a number of different careers, and seen, as you say, it from different perspectives in your zigzag career, which I think is just, a very rich and very insightful, way of looking back and thinking about it. And typically, many people are going to be in a similar situation. So what advice would you have to people, sort of going into studies, approaching a PhD or a master's or a postgraduate level qualification, hoping to make progress in a career or think about another career, etc.? What's the mindset that they need to have, and what, in terms of your experience, should they prioritize and think about as they do that and try and make the right decisions?
Thanks, Peter. So I think, of course, the biggest difference between an undergraduate degree and a postgraduate degree is that you are going to have to do some research. And for most people moving into a postgraduate degree, this is the first time that they will have done so. So it's important to understand, to ensure that you understand how to do this. And I think a lot of people are afraid to ask, they're afraid to appear stupid. But I would say, make sure that you answer any question that arises in your head as soon as it arises there. Don't waste time not understanding something, feeling like you're the only one who doesn't understand it. Universities are paid by the government every time a student graduates. So the whole university system, and I think this is something students don't always understand, the whole university system is designed to help you achieve your degree. So there are a huge number of resources. And if you don't land at the right resource the first time you ask, that person will inevitably point you to the right resource. So there are courses which teach you how to do research. There are courses which teach you how to do academic writing. There's a lot of psychosocial support. So if you are struggling with mental health, or you are just struggling to cope with your workload, you don't know how to prioritize everything that you need to do. Some people may be working full-time, have families, and be trying to study on top of it. Whatever it is that is preventing you from moving forward fast onto the next step in your studies, make sure that you reach out, ask the question, find the support. As I said, the whole system is designed to help you get there.
I love what you said earlier about answer any question that arises in your mind. And one of the things that I do teach in one of my courses about how to be successful in academic studies is that there's an intricate relationship between thinking and writing. And, you know, we may sort of spend a lot of time thinking and dwelling on complex problems such as climate change or software engineering, or even our own career direction and choices that we need to make. But as you move through those stages, I think being able to write, and as you say, you've had a career in writing as well, actually processes that mental thinking into something that somebody else can consume and give you feedback on. And as much as there's a time and a place for the verbal interaction and consultation, I think with a big emphasis on research and with a big emphasis on, you know, certainly at a postgraduate level, people absolutely being measured on their performance through their writing output. You know, if the quality of their writing doesn't stack up to the quality of their thinking, no one's going to know about that great thinking that's going on in that brain. And what I see many students doing is leaving that writing process until far too late. So whether it's, as you say, the sort of more generative process of thinking through issues and trying to resolve them, I always think there must be a writing component to that, whether it's an informal journal or sort of more formal discussion papers with your supervisors, for example, or ultimately a high quality final report that makes a contribution to society and earns you your degree. You know, so I think that writing and thinking relationship, you know, talks to what you were saying there about answering questions quickly. And in my, I would say, answer the question quickly and get it on paper. And then when you see how you write it and articulate those issues and those questions and answers, it actually improves the next thought that you have. And that iterative process then I think just makes you a better and better postgraduate student.
Well, I think what you said about not leaving everything until the end is absolutely critical. As you said, if you do struggle to write, you may not know it. This may be the first time you've ever had to write something, and best that you identify that early and get support rather than finding out too late. And even if you are a fantastic writer, it takes a long time to knock out a research report. Whether you're doing coursework and research or a full research report, it takes a long time. And often your thoughts, you do process your thoughts over a period. So starting early enables you to process, to further the writing, to process some more, to further the writing some more. And that's how you end up with a really quality output.
And Kanina, over your sort of academic career, I mean, as you say, you know, we've all sort of produced lots of big chunks of writing for different people and in different styles and formats, etc. I mean, you've been in the journalistic world, and that's a very different style of writing to academic writing, which is also different between faculties, etc. I mean, what are your thoughts and takeaways around making writing a skill that you can practice and get good at? And what's been your sort of maybe highs and lows in your writing over the years?
Well, as you say, I started my writing career as a journalist. So that taught me to do two things. Firstly, to write fast, because oftentimes I would get back to the newsroom after having spent a day covering a story, and I'd have an hour or half an hour until deadline. So learn to write fast. And often I think we can become precious about our writing, and we can take an unnecessarily long time, which actually compromises your final outcome. The second thing that it taught me to do was to write with brevity, so to write short rather than long, and because often as a journalist you're writing to a word count, and if you don't cut out those extraneous words, the copy editor will, and that's far more painful to a journalist to see half of your piece disappear once it's on page than to make those cuts yourself. So you're really incentivized to write to the point. And those two things definitely helped me in writing my research report. But again, those are skills which you develop over time, and you might not come to your research report with those skills. And then it's quite painful to have written 30 pages and see half of them disappear under your supervisor's red pen.
Red pen, exactly.
But you should know that that's not unusual. So it's painful but necessary process.
Yeah, that's a wonderful perspective. There's a wonderful book that I recommend to my students called How to Fix Your Academic Writing Trouble, written by Inga Mewburn, and she runs a great group called the Thesis Whisperer. And what she's done is she's actually approached this issue of writing well from the end product. So she's taken all the typical examiners or supervisors comments that you'd see in the margin and the red pen, slashing through paragraphs and pages, etc., and then written the book from those comments back into the writing to say, if you get this issue, this is how you resolve it, etc. And I think that is such a good perspective, because it's often at that moment of truth when you've got that comment back from a supervisor or an examiner now to fix your writing. What do you do? How do you go back to it? And as you say, if you're precious about it, there's an emotional attachment that you still have to get over. Never mind fixing what it is that you need to sort out. So I love those insights.
I completely agree. Often it's the ideas that we are most attached to that are the first that need to go. I had a fantastic news editor while I was a journalist who always used to drill into us, kill your darlings, kill your darlings. And it's so true.
True. We think, write for your reader. I mean, so we always think that like what's in our mind and what we want to get across and what that, that's ringing a bell for us. But when they're a little bit more neutral and they've got a product to get out to market for a readership, they have a better sense potentially of what that set of readers is looking for. Kanina, maybe just to change gears a little bit, and I mean, I think the writing is just such an important academic skill, but also, students struggle with just balance. I mean, you did touch on it earlier. People have got families and businesses to run and teams to look after and pressures, whether it's in a corporate or an entrepreneurial environment, and even full-time students, I find are pressured and stressed and still have lots of balls in the air. And particularly, I think what we've all been through in 2020, has sort of added stress and mental issues for many people, etc. But in your experience and everything that you've been through and managed to achieve, what are some of your tips and tricks for achieving balance, and how can people apply that to, get the most out of their day and manage all the different priorities that are competing for their time and effort?
I think balance is absolutely critical. You have to do enough work, enough play, enough exercise, enough prayer or meditation, if that's a thing. Spend enough time with friends and family, and it's not easy juggling all of those balls. I found it incredibly important when I was studying because I was working full-time at the same time. And in fact, I was working for the Vice Chancellor of Wits University during the time of Fees Must Fall. So there was a lot of work pressure, a lot of overtime. So my weekends were eaten into by my job. And then I had to do my studies on the weekends on top of that. So it was really important to maintain that balance. It can be very, very easy to say, oh, well, I'll just spend the Saturday, Sunday working, and then I'll get to exercise the next weekend. Well, I'll get to see my friends the next weekend. But if you push out those things too far, you end up depleted. You risk burnout. It's really important to maintain balance. I also found what helped me was to maintain a clear idea of why it was that I was pursuing this this degree. If you can maintain that clear idea, it will help you during the hard times. It'll help you to keep pushing when you need to. It'll help you to rest when you need to, because you know you need that as well. So to have a clear idea in your head of why you're doing this and what is the final outcome you want to see.
It keeps you rooted.
Exactly.
Helps you, yep, it helps you, work back to the decisions of either sacrifice or restoring yourself that you need to make that could jeopardize achieving that outcome. And if you've defined it clearly, and it's interesting, I was talking to someone the other day who actually has left a blank space on their wall where their workspace is, and that's where their degree certificate is going to go when they finish their PhD. So that blank space is a symbol almost of why they're working so hard and why they're up at 4 o'clock in the morning to get their work done, as opposed to other people who may actually have a bit of a something that they've written on the wall, a little bit more concrete. Sometimes the absence of something, which I thought was quite powerful as a visual metaphor for what you're trying to do, is to fill that space.
I absolutely love that. And I think your purpose is very personal. You shouldn't let anyone else define it for you. And you don't have to tell anyone else about it. It's something that you keep close to your heart, and you just you use it to motivate you in the times when you need it the most.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's amazing. Kanina, then, you mentioned your very senior role at Wits, and obviously during quite a challenging time for Wits, and I think for wider society, and certainly I think we all observed that and saw what we were all going through at that point. But maybe your experience in an institution like the University of Witwatersrand, biggest and sort of one of the top universities in the world. Your insights about how education in general, obviously going through a bit of an evolution and a disruption, etc. Your thoughts and how potentially, either students or lecturers or academic administrators can be thinking about the future, and possibly what you think they may need to anticipate to keep the academic project going. It maybe is a slight inflection point.
Well, we've had an extraordinary time in the higher education sector in South Africa, because, as you say, we went through fees must fall. Well, first we went through roads must fall, and then we went through fees must fall, and they were distinct in terms of the issues they were raising. And now we're going through COVID. And so we've really had to adapt to many changes in a very short amount of time. With regard to fees must fall, the two issues there were really alienation and access. And the alienation was something that had been felt by students for primarily Black students for a long time. And it was a kind of institutional alienation where the customs are not necessarily familiar to you. The role models you see standing in front of you in a classroom do not necessarily look like you. And so that raised a set of issues which I think most universities have addressed with transformation agendas, and most universities are certainly making a very concerted effort to change the issues which the students raised. And the second issue was access. And that, again, was something that vice chancellors had been warning governments about for some time. The fact that the state subsidies had been declining relative to the number of students, overall number of students in the system. So the per capita state subsidy had been declining. And what universities were doing was that they were increasing student fees by eventually double digits in order to compensate for that per capita subsidy decline. And of course, it just reached a point where it was unsustainable. We were pricing education out of the hands of not necessarily the poor students who were kind of covered by the bursary system, and of course not the rich students who could still afford education, but really the missing middle, as they came to be known. Students who were too rich for bursaries or financial aid, and too poor to be able to afford it themselves. So having addressed those two huge issues, or at least beginning to address those two huge issues, universities have now had to confront COVID. And I think, like with most sectors, it has accelerated a change which was in the pipelines already. I think the problem with universities is there's not much resources with which to undertake this digitization project. It is a project which is important. We need to start enabling access to students around the world. And once you digitize content, you can do so very effectively, which is really exciting. And I think it's a change which most people are embracing.
And as we digitize content, I mean, you know, there is a risk, you know, that sort of lecture hall, teacher classroom model, you know, is going to look slightly different. And I mean, as you say, you can digitize content. There's still, I believe, a human element that you could never digitize, I hope, and that remains important for students. But do you think that the right answer is somewhere in the middle, and that we are approaching it in the right way to find the right answers and maximize the benefits of the digitization and the efficiencies that that's given us, and the commoditization of content that can be commoditized, but then still have an important role for lecturers and experienced people, as you say, to ensure that there's that familiarity and the access to the people and the relationships that is also an important aspect of getting through postgraduate studies?
I think you are correct. I think a hybrid model is the one which will emerge. And I think it is not necessarily because we want to retain the lecturer-student phenomenon. I think technologies they can take the place of that without us losing too much in the fallout. But I think what is incredibly important in the university experience is the social interactions which take place, the networks which you build, and how that assists you as you move into the workplace. The colleagues, the peers you can reach out to, and also the social skills that you pick up, dealing with conflict, dealing with diversity. These are things which students learn over the 3, 4, 5, 6 years for which they're on campus, which it's very difficult to find a replacement for online.
And how do you think we retain that? I mean, in a post-COVID world, you know, presuming we will have some on-campus activity back to some level of normality. I mean, your thoughts about just then us being a little bit more intentional about that aspect rather than it being a consequence of people studying in the same place?
I think what might end up happening is that your lectures are delivered virtually, but then you are required to come in for certain designated periods of time to engage your peers, to engage in syndicate work, to engage your tutors, because I think that as much as an excellent teacher can deliver content very effectively online, there'll always be questions which are easier to ask in person, issues which are easier to analyze in person. So I think what will end up happening is a digitization of content, but an assembly of students in a place at a given time to work together, to ask questions of a tutor. And I think that what's really exciting about that is now that your lecture halls are not full during lecture times, you can essentially, I mean, the numbers, you can increase your student numbers by so much. And that immediately starts to address that issue of access, which we were discussing. How do we get more students in the system at a given time?
And do you think that that scale effect that we get from digital combined with the right level of human interaction, you know, that could also be a powerful lever that we could pull possibly in the South African context, as you mentioned earlier, high volumes coming through, but with declining, you know, income and resources to address that. Is this the fourth industrial revolution reality potentially that hopefully we are going to be able to take advantage of?
I think it is, and I think what will be important to universities in the global south is that they stay relevant in a world where students can attend Harvard online and they can attend MIT online. How do you ensure that universities in the global south remain relevant? And I think, of course, one thing we offer, which the Harvards and the MITs of the world don't, is a contextual understanding of issues which are relevant to us. So there's no replacement for the issues we encounter on a day-to-day basis, or rather the contextual knowledge we pick up about the issues we encounter on a day-to-day basis, and our know-how about how best to solve these issues. So I think what we will also end up seeing happen as we move into a digitized higher education world is more global partnerships. So maybe you get the best MIT mathematics lecturer teaching a component of a data science degree, which also brings in a contextual perspective from an anthropologist from Wits University. Again, bringing in that interdisciplinarity, I think that will be a feature of these global partnerships which start to emerge in our world.
Okay, did you anticipate this level of acceleration into that digital world when you did your interdisciplinary research?
I don't think anyone anticipated the level of acceleration we're experiencing now. But I think we are, and as much as we're still experiencing the shocks of that acceleration, I think we are all glad to see it happen.
Okay, so Kanina, I mean, yeah, we've talked about the future of institutions and how students are going to position themselves to be successful now and understand what's coming down the track. What about yourself? I mean, maybe a fourth degree for you potentially, or are you not keen on any, specific studying in the short term? What are your future plans looking like, from an academic perspective or otherwise?
Well, thanks for asking. In fact, after working for Wits, I left to start my first startup, which was really an attempt to create that interdisciplinary environment that we've been speaking about. So to create a place where we enable top minds to come together, to bring their ideas to life, very similar to the MIT Media Lab, for those listeners who know about that lab. Very interesting and exciting place. That led me into the world of entrepreneurial ecosystems, where I currently am working. Specifically, I'm raising a venture fund to invest in early stage female-focused businesses. It's extraordinary when you look at the statistics, how much better female-owned or led businesses perform compared to their male counterparts. Think if it were any other asset class, capital would be flooding into the space. But because most of the decision makers in the venture capital world are male, we see a huge capital deficit. In fact, only 3% of global capital, venture capital funding goes to female founders. So we're working to correct that. I'm working to correct that in the African space, in particular, the Southern African space. Women are more likely to become entrepreneurs in Southern Africa than anywhere else in the world. So there's a huge funding gap here and huge potential for female-led businesses to do incredible things.
That's incredible.
So I'm still I'm learning on a day-to-day basis, even though I'm not currently engaged in formal studies. But I'm not ruling it out for the future.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, Kanina, thank you. I mean, this has just been such a wide-ranging, insightful discussion on so many topics, and it'd be great just to have you back on the show, and we could maybe go a little bit more deeper into maybe a couple of more specific aspects. But just in general, I mean, over your academic career, looking back and then now positioning yourself for the future and making some intentional decisions as you go and learning from maybe those zigzags that you went through along the way and what I've experienced in my own life as well. All of that being said and done, and people listening to this now, starting tomorrow, what do you think they could do better that's just going to help position them, given this rapidly changing world and the pressures of studies that they're going through, etc.? Make it practical for our listeners. What are some of the tips and tricks that you've developed over the years to help you get through on a day-to-day basis that they can start tomorrow, possibly?
Well, I think one thing I wish that I'd known when I was embarking on my postgraduate studies is that don't take too long to decide on your research topic. So for those listeners who are in the position of that you're just starting, you have this research paper ahead of you, you're not sure what you want to write about, it is ideal to find something that you're deeply curious about, and if you have that topic in mind, that's great. But for those who don't take too long. And a tip that I think is really valuable is to reach out to industry. So if you are doing a master's in accounting, reach out to Deloitte. Find someone you know there. Ask them, what is the one issue that you wish you could spend time researching, but your job just doesn't give you the time to research it? And I think that helps you with two things. It helps you to find a topic which is relevant to industry. And secondly, it helps you to start building those relationships which could lead to a job down the line. So I think certainly that is something I wish I'd known. And I'd also wish I'd known that it's possible to find a co-supervisor from industry. So you can actually have someone mentor you who's from industry, who provides a lot of relevance and contextual understanding to your research. But Peter, broader than that, I suppose, more general advice, I wish I'd known a long time ago. A personal realization which I recently came to. It's a little bit cheesy, but I found it to be really important. Is to ask not what you can get from the world, but what you can give to the world. It's been a very simple but very important reframing for me, which I found has brought me a lot more purpose and actually happiness at the end of the day.
Wow, that's incredible, Kanina. Thank you. It's been such an inspiration to talk to you, and our listeners will have got so much value from this discussion, and we all wish you ongoing success. And as I say, we'd love to have you back on, and maybe we'll do a live Q&A with some students, and they can also ask you some questions as well if you are keen to that type of format. But I wish you well with that capital raise and then future studies, or maybe digging out your old research and seeing how that thinking helps, in this accelerated post-COVID digital world. So Kanina, thank you so much. Your insights have been absolutely valuable and useful, and everyone listening, guys, go out there and just make a difference and think what you can give back to the world. And the example that we've heard from today is Kanina. So thank you, Kanina. Appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Peter.